movie Easter egg that's an even bigger Easter egg than you realize. In the 1985 film The Goonies, the character of Sloth, hey you guys, at a certain point opens up to reveal that he is wearing a Superman t-shirt. Now it's kind of funny, it's a reference to the original Superman, which was by the same studio, Warner Brothers, but it's a little deeper than that, because the director of The Goonies is Richard Donner, who also directed the 1978 original OG Superman with Christopher Reeve. He also directed part 2, but the movie was taken away from him. That's a whole other story. But that is an Easter egg that is more than one level. It's more than just wink, wink, oh cool, he's wearing a t-shirt. No, it's the same filmmaker essentially winking at himself. Don't see that too often.
And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to episode 208 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for joining me on this fine Friday evening here in New York. We're going to skip all of the promotional bullshit. If you want to subscribe, you know what to do. If you want to listen to the audio version of the podcast, you know what to do. We're going to, in the immortal words of Jack Nicholson, we're going to cut past the chase and get right to the outcome. So today is the 39th anniversary of the Goonies, the Steven Spielberg produced Richard Donner classic, another Gen X standard, a great movie, although some would consider it a guilty pleasure. I think it's just a flat out fantastic film, and one that I became a fan of a little late. I was in 5th grade when this film was released, and a number of my friends in Mr. Fink's 5th grade class at Fairfield Elementary, they all went to see it. They were all excited. They loved it. I was in the 11-year-old version of my fuck this, fuck that, fuck this, fuck that, fuck this, fuck them all phase. It lasted until I guess I was about 32 or 33, if I'm being honest. But I was very resistant, even though I love movies. I was very resistant, and it was something about the poster and the ads, I don't know, it just pissed me off. I don't want to see it. I'm not going. Standard reaction. So I didn't become a fan until late. But what I do remember in that time is that it's the second film that Spielberg produced, but there was a sense that his fingerprints were all over it. And a lot was said about the original Poltergeist, which came out, I want to say 3 years earlier. And technically, Tobe Hooper, who had done, among others, the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, was credited as director. But there were people who said he didn't really direct it. Spielberg directed. Oh, we're not supposed to say that out loud? Go back to the 50s. A movie called The Thing, the original The Thing, which is a spectacular film. Old school sci-fi, some great costume work. James Arness as the creature, you really don't see it. But the credited director is somebody named Christian Nyby. Howard Hawks directed that film. Take it from me. Well, you don't have to take it from me. But so sometimes when you say the fingerprints are all over it, they're giving you the old wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and they're saying, well, this person really was responsible for it. In this instance, it's not the case. Richard Donner directed The Goonies, but there is no mistaking the Spielberg influence. And I remember when I saw the poster for this movie, it kind of looked like a little bit of elements of the poster from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and Raiders of the Lost Ark. That was not a coincidence. But I didn't see the movie for a number of years after it came out, despite certain friends, and even right now there are people of my age bracket that if you say, what are your 10 favorite movies? Not 10 best, your 10 favorite movies. A significant percentage of people right around my age this movie's on the list. It's going to be on a lot of lists. So I am now a big fan of The Goonies. Late to the party. I didn't watch it until I've seen parts of it because it was always aired on HBO and Cinemax. But I don't think I ever watched more than 10 minutes at a time until I was in my early 20s. That's how absurd I was. And I was just resistant to sitting down and watching the whole movie because reasons. But then when I watched it, it's like, what the hell? This movie's great. Why did I have to be? Well, doesn't matter. It's a great movie. And feels like it is not a coincidence that most of the cast ended up having huge careers. Josh Brolin as Brand, Thanos himself, and he's done so much other great work on top of just, the kind of voice and the intimidation factor with his voice. And I guess they did some motion capture, but Josh Brolin's a great actor. And often you have the kind of the Nepo baby and all this kind of shit. He's a better actor than his old man. I like James Brolin. My dad was a fan of James Brolin. But Josh Brolin's a huge talent. You look at what he did in Men in Black 3. He does a feature-length Tommy Lee Jones impression, and he pulls it off and makes it look easy. That is not just a guy who happens to have a certain look and a certain drawl and a certain growl, depending on the role. Josh Brolin's a major talent. Now, he doesn't really get to show his acting chops very much in the Goonies. But think about future Oscar winner Ke Huy Quan, or Jonathan Ke Quan, but Ke Huy Quan, who had worked on Temple of Doom with Spielberg and then got this role, and he's a rip in this film. He looks significantly bigger than in Temple of Doom. He presumably hit a growth spurt. His career really didn't go anywhere after that. He had a couple of bit parts. He had a small role in Encino Man with Brendan Fraser, and it was, for me, one of the highlights of the whole Oscar season of the 2023 Oscar season, the first part of that year, movies released in 2022. People were pretty sure that Key was going to get supporting actor for Everything Everywhere All at Once. They didn't know about Brendan Fraser for The Whale. I saw The Whale. It's a very, very difficult movie. I love Brendan Fraser. He's one of our guys. But, those sorts of roles, that's what we call Oscar bait. So, I don't know. I love what he did in Everything Everywhere All at Once. And seeing those two guys who had a friendship in the early 90s, and they shot a number of scenes together. They probably worked together for about a week and a half to 2 weeks. And seeing them all growed up, in the case of Brendan Fraser, it made this incredible comeback, and so had Ke Huy Quan. Hollywood gets so many things wrong, and when I say Hollywood, I mean the whole kit and caboodle. There's so much over the decades, over the generations that we can criticize Hollywood for, but occasionally Hollywood gives us moments, not even within films, but gives us life moments that hit us. And seeing Ke Huy Quan and Brendan Fraser celebrating before the Oscars, reconnecting, and then at the Oscars, and then, goodness gracious, seeing Harrison Ford and Ke Huy Quan hugging on the Oscar stage. It does not get better than that for a Gen X film geek who grew up watching Temple of Doom on endless repeat. And that is, I'm sorry, my favorite Harrison Ford character, as much as I love Star Wars. Indiana Jones, he will always be Indy first. Han second. Martin Stett third. That's the character he plays in the conversation. But you look at Sean Astin, what he did in his later career. A movie I talked about on the channel, Toy Soldiers, a terrific action film where Sean Astin was like a kid still. He gets to channel his inner John McClane and kick some ass when terrorists take over his prep school. Then he did Rudy, which many argue, I don't share this opinion, but many have it in their top 5 best sports films. Is it in my top 5? No. I don't even know if it's in my top 10. The same feel and the same kind of production, and I don't know if it was the same filmmaker. I know David Anspaugh did Hoosiers, but Rudy and Hoosiers share, there's a certain commonality in the presentation of the story, regardless of if it's the exact same filmmaker. And no, both movies don't have Dennis Hopper. But Sean Astin as Rudy, it is a great performance. Even though the movie's really good, but it's not my top 5. And I don't even have Hoosiers in my top 5. I think if I put a gun to my, listen, Field of Dreams, I don't love it. Bull Durham, I like it, I don't love it. So that's where I'm coming from. I don't follow the conventional sports movie pattern, if you will. But Sean Astin, Lord of the Rings, as Sam, he's just great. He's great. His performance never wavers. He's the loyal friend. He doesn't turn into an asshole. and not to take shots at Harry Potter, but in the world of the story, the moments where Ron kind of loses it and turns on him, Astin sells it. He's such a great actor. And then you look at the rest of the cast, Corey Feldman, who inadvertently became a truth teller because he and his old buddy, the late, great Corey Haim, were subjected to horrendous physical and psychological abuse by a lot of scumbags in the 1980s Hollywood. Nobody really knows who for sure. But Corey was castigated for coming forward, and his career was hurt. Remember, he did Stand By Me right after this, and he's fantastic in that film too. But the main cast also includes somebody who doesn't work that much anymore. She might actually be retired, Martha Plimpton, who made a ton of terrific films in the 80s. She was in the movie where River Phoenix was nominated for Oscar for supporting, Running on Empty. She did Mosquito Coast with Harrison Ford and River Phoenix again. Parenthood, a great movie. I should do an episode just on Parenthood. You know, the TV show, it was loosely inspired by the movie. Steve Martin is the star, but it is an all-star rogues gallery of great actors. Mary Steenburgen, a very young Keanu Reeves, Rick Moranis, Harley Jane Kozak, Jason Robards Jr., just an absolute, and a very young Joaquin Phoenix, who went by, I think he went by Leaf Phoenix at the time. But in the world of that movie, Martha Plimpton plays Diane Wiest, I forgot her, Diane Wiest's daughter, and she becomes pregnant by, and wants to get married, and does marry the character played by Keanu, whose name is Todd, but Diane Wiest derisively always refers to him as that Todd. When I think of the movie Parenthood, my first thought is Diane Wiest snarling the phrase, that Todd. Well, that Todd ends up being a pretty good guy and helping a lot of different family members. It's not his fame, marries into it. You want to see an early Keanu Reeves performance? You want to see how a guy who is not necessarily a great actor has such incredible ability to relate to other performers on screen that you can't help but like him? He steals every scene he's in just by being Keanu. But Martha Plimpton, the number one Martha Plimpton moment, it comes in the Mosquito Coast with, as I say, Harrison Ford, Helen Mirren, and what a fucking home run hitter cast. A Dame Helen Mirren, I'm sorry. River Phoenix. Martha Plimpton is kind of briefly the love interest of the River Phoenix character. And her way of flirting with him, I've never heard this before. I've never heard this line before. She says to River Phoenix, I think about you when I go to the bathroom. What? What? Then she repeats it later in the story. I don't know why, but that line hit me funny, and I think it's supposed to be funny, even though her character is not a character of fun. She's not supposed to be a clown, but I guess it's a very sort of primitive seduction technique, maybe, but I never heard that one before. I never heard it again, only in that movie. But the way that Martha Plimpton delivers the line, and then later in the film when she makes eye contact with River Phoenix, and she mouths the words, I think about you when I go to the bathroom. The last time I watched the movie, because I knew I was screaming. I mean, that's... The Goonies is a story about family through and through. A story about connection. Now, it's a story about a dysfunctional family, the Fratellis. The late, great Anne Ramsey, an Oscar nominee, not long after this, for Throw Mama from the Train. And if you're asking me, I think she should have won because she's a fucking scream in that movie. Owen! It's not easy to be in a movie with Billy Crystal and Danny DeVito, and especially Danny DeVito, and steal every scene. But Anne Ramsey absolutely does it. She's just incredible in Throw Mama from the Train. But the Fratellis, the kind of negative family. Anne Ramsey as Mama Fratelli. Joey Pants, Joe Pantoliano, not long before he began work on Spielberg's Empire of the Sun. And the other brother is played by a terrific actor, was in so many great movies in the 80s and 90s, Robert Davi. Now he's a singer. He does like a Sinatra thing. He's supposedly a pretty good singer, but a very distinctive, interesting actor. Gen Xers, remember him from Die Hard. I'm Agent Johnson. This is Special Agent Johnson. No relation. Robert Davi. Fucking guy. But the story of the Goonies, ultimately, it's a caper film. It's a quest film. Because you have these young people who are in a terrible situation. They love their home. And we're presented with where most of the kids have at least decent relationships with their parents. They don't tell them everything, obviously. But they're about to all be, not really evicted. They're about to be zoned out, would be more precise. They're building something, or there's some kind of a zoning issue, and all of them have to go, unless they can come up with a shit ton of money, that's basically the story. And Sean Astin's character he learns of a buried treasure. There's a treasure map, and he learns of this buried treasure that is supposedly very close to where they all live. It's called the Goondocks, hence the term Goonies. And he comes up with what, if we're looking at it objectively and don't know that this is a movie, we'd say this is a pretty harebrained scheme. You're just a bunch of kids. You got to get home to your folks. You're all doomed. You're all going to have to move away, and you're probably not going to be friends anymore because there's no internet, there's no social media. You're going to have to write letters to each other. Tough shit. It's a bad break, but unfortunately, it's life. But the character, whose name is Mikey, and Josh Brolin plays his older brother, Brand, in the film. I guess Brandon, but Brand. So that's that family unit. He manages to talk his friends and kind of coerce. There's a lot of slapsticky stuff with Josh Brolin. I don't really think it works very well. It's just kind of stupid, but it works for the target audience. It's a kind of thing that if you saw this movie when you were 10, it plays better than it probably would if you watch it for the first time now, because there is a lot of material in the first act. You could lose about at least 5 minutes and you're not going to lose anything from the film. But he manages to get his friends, and I forgot the actress Kerry Green. She doesn't really work much anymore either. She's pretty much retired. But Kerry Green is a very distinctive, striking actress. And she made a very deep impression in the next year, the movie called Lucas, which is an underdog story starring, I already mentioned him, Corey Feldman's buddy, Corey Haim. And that movie doesn't do what you think it's going to do. And it's terrific. It's an absolute winner. You had a very young Winona Ryder and Corey Haim, and Charlie Sheen had a good role. But Charlie Sheen, I think he played Kerry Green's, or they were going out, whatever it was. But Kerry Green had a very distinctive look. She was striking, but in a relatable girl next door kind of way, as opposed to matinee idol good looks. And she's very good in this film. You know, she has a guy, and she has his jacket, and there's a whole thing with wearing the jacket, and is the guy going to get it in, and all of this kind of locker room stuff. But her character ends up being a key player in the young kids figuring out, is there a treasure? And is there any way for us to get the treasure? Or are we simply going to all die? And that's basically the movie. So the film takes the form of an adventure story, and from a different angle, the idea of the treasure itself, and helping the town. I mean, it could have been an Indiana Jones film. Do you think about Temple of Doom, which is much darker? But Indiana Jones in that movie is on a quest not for fortune and glory. He thinks it's for fortune and glory, as he also mistakenly thinks that in The Last Crusade is going to be the same thing. But it isn't. He's on a quest for others. He's helping others. And the kids in this film, they are not motivated by rational self-interest or greed, if you prefer. They're motivated by a love of family, and they don't want to go anywhere. And they want to stuff it to those developers that are throwing them out. Fuck them. And so it's a bit of an old-fashioned, the movie's almost 40 years old, but even for the time, it's an old-fashioned presentation where they're going for this, not for their own selves. They're going for this to help their lives. They're going to enrich their lives, in this case, by not having to leave, by being able to stay in the Goondocks and stay amongst their best and dearest friends, who may end up being friends for life. The Goonies was a hit. It grossed 125 plus million worldwide, but it probably should have been a bigger hit. It didn't connect. Not enough people were geared up to see it before it came out. The sense is that, because film got good reviews, it's in the high 70s on Rotten Tomatoes. Again, if you believe in film criticism, I happen to believe in film criticism, even though I frequently disagree with critics, but I do think that Metacritic and Rotten Tomatoes, they are at least decent barometers. There's no such thing as a film with a 15% Rotten Tomatoes score that is like an unsung masterpiece. Now, maybe you'll find a 15%er and like it, or think that it's entertaining, but there's no Citizen Kane sitting at 15%. There is no Schindler's List sitting at 15%. There's no Titanic sitting at 15%. Or even Raiders of the Lost Ark sitting at 15%. But if a score is in the high 70s, and you know that it's got a ton of reviews, it's going to be a good movie. Now, you may not spark to it, but it's going to be a quality effort. And not everybody, most people I know love this movie, but not everybody is going to say, oh, it's definitely as good as such and such a movie. I don't put it on par with the first three Indiana Jones films. Now, there are Gen Xers that would rank the Goonies above at least one of the Indiana Jones films. Now, I think a better question, when you look at a sort of lesser George Lucas film like Willow, which has, I mean, the Goonies has some magical elements when you think about it, but Willow is more directly a story of magic and fantasy than the Goonies. Which do you prefer? I prefer the Goonies. I like Willow. It's another film that I got too late. I didn't see it all the way through until relatively recently. You know, now you can catch up. If you have Disney, you can watch whatever. They have entire library worth of films where you used to have to maybe pay a couple of bucks, or heaven forbid, still have some physical media like a DVD. We'll never completely be rid of DVDs, nor should we. As Christopher Nolan pointed out, we don't want to be at the mercy of the evil streaming services. His quote, and he was joking, but the idea of physical media. This is the only VHS tape that I rescued, The Thin Blue Line. I threw out a couple of hundred. Most of the ones I tossed were of blank tapes that I recorded movies from. It sounds so absurd if you're a young person that never had to do this, but if you're over 40, obviously you know what I'm talking about. But physical media, the need for physical media, the movie Leave the World Behind shows it very clearly. You could have a situation where we have lights, but we don't have any signal, we don't have any Wi-Fi. Well, you can still live quite comfortably if you have thousands of DVDs. At least you'll be able to entertain yourself. Something to think about. Something I didn't think about until reading that interview with Nolan, where I'm like, why is he going off on this tangent about the need for physical media? What the fuck is he? Oh, hadn't thought of it that way. So yeah, if you still have your DVD of the Goonies or your VHS tape, keep it. You're not going to make any money. It's not going to be a collector's item, but just in case you can't find it on streaming, or it's $5 and you have a DVD, you're allowed to watch a DVD. But I've probably seen the Goonies from start to finish, certainly 4 or 5 times, no more. There are other films from that era and in that ballpark of, exciting adventure type movies, or even action movies, like James Cameron's Aliens from the next year. I've seen that at least 15 times. Ridley Scott's Alien from '79, I've seen that more like 10 times. So there are movies. Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan, I've seen probably 20 times, start to finish. The Goonies is a movie that I won't just put it on if I'm by myself, but if I'm with somebody who hasn't seen it, absolutely. For me, it's good enough. It's always good enough to rewatch when introducing somebody who hasn't seen it. And invariably, I think that's twice that I've done that. Both times they loved it. One time they didn't think they were going to like it at all and were shocked. And the other time it was one of those, oh, I've heard so much about this, I can't wait. And when that happens, you sure as fuck want them to like the movie. You don't want them to walk away disappointed. Now, there's always been talk about a sequel or some kind of maybe a side sequel, a soft reboot where it kind of picks up on the first story, like what they did with Candyman, the Jordan Peele produced reboot, where they teased it as a reboot, but it's actually a direct sequel to the original Candyman. So I don't really expect anything more. But hey, Top Gun Maverick opens the door to a lot. And it makes it possible to revisit characters decades later, where the actors are believably decades older. And let's just see what happens. But the filmmaker Richard Donner, and I realize I'm leaving out a lot of essential plot beats, but I figure if you've gotten this far enough into this episode, you've already seen the movie a number of times. So you don't need me to recite, beat by beat and the action sequences and stuff like that. But so Richard Donner directed this film, and I don't think Spielberg really did anything on this. I think that he let Donner make the movie that he wanted to make. And there were movies where Donner himself was just part of a production team, and he was not known to get involved as far as be very hands-on. But Richard Donner, a great filmmaker, the Lethal Weapon series, the original Superman, which is a wonderful movie. I mean, I absolutely love it. And Christopher Reeve, he was responsible for Christopher Reeve, the single greatest bit of casting in Hollywood in the last 50 years. That is a hill that I will go down on. Christopher Reeve as Clark Kent, Kal-El, Superman. The best casting since at least 1974. You want to go say Godfather, whatever. But Richard Donner loves that movie. Didn't love the fact that the Salkins kind of fucked him out of the sequel, even though he shot most of it. And they just absurd. They brought in Richard Lester, and Lester had a kind of different take, a more comedic take, not the verisimilitude, the attempt to ground it as much in reality as you could for a story like Superman. But by the time of the Goonies, Donner's thoughts had changed, at least as much as the character of Sloth, who I didn't realize was played by, I knew within the last few years, but at the time the movie came out, I didn't realize that it was played by John Matuzak, who was a famous football player. He played for the Raiders. He was a all-pro caliber player who unfortunately died very young. He died of an accidental drug overdose when he was still in his 30s. Matuzak was, not surprisingly, he was a big dude. He was kind of a Lyle Alzado, like if people remember, look, the young people don't know who the fuck that is, but Lyle Alzado was another guy who was a football player who was just an enormous, 250-pound, single-digit body fat. Oh, I don't even work out with weights. Like just a genetic mega superior in the case of the Twos, John Matuzak. But Matuzak plays the key character of Sloth, who is part of this dysfunctional Fratelli family. And the character of Chunk is played by, was it Jeff Cohn? A fellow Cohane in the world of the movie. Let me make sure it is. Yeah, Jeff Cohen, fellow Cohane, who kind of left the movie business. I think he's an entertainment lawyer now. But his character, the character of Chunk, and Sloth end up being more important than it seems. And Matuzak was in heavy makeup. He was a real trooper being able to, go through all that, the makeup work. But at a certain point in the film, no spoilers, he rips open his shirt and he is wearing a Superman tee underneath. And Richard Donner on the soundtrack puts the memorable, quick little beat of John Williams' iconic Superman score. Just for that one moment, paying homage to himself and the great movie, made a shit ton of money for the parent company, Warner Brothers. But the great movie that he had done 7 years earlier, and 90% of Superman 2 is him, and at least now we have his so-called director's cut that we can see it and compare. Because I like the Richard Lester version, even though it's goofier and there's a lot of stuff like dumb jokes and whatnot. But I like that movie too. It would have been better if Donner just hadn't been fired because they shot 1 and 2 more or less concurrently. That's something you probably didn't know. Like what they did with Lord of the Rings, shot all 3 films back to back to back, and a belly to belly to belly. Just like Matrix 2 and 3, the films were shot concurrently because you have all the locations and you can hit, well, it doesn't matter if this is part 5 and part 2 and part 3. We're going to shoot the scenes. We'll just change the makeup and hair a little bit. You have the locations, you take advantage, and you shoot what you can. But The Goonies is a great film, and it's available. It's free on streaming, I think, on a number of platforms. I know that it's been on Netflix. It was on Prime, and it was on Max for a while. You might have to pay a couple of bucks. But it's worth checking out if you haven't seen it. And if you have, it's worth seeing again. It's a great movie, a classic, a box office hit with the Spielberg magic all throughout its entire 2-hour running time. The Goonies, produced by Steven Spielberg, directed by Richard Donner, and starring Sean Astin, Josh Brolin, Jeff Cohen, Kerry Green, Corey Feldman, Ki Hai Kwan, and Martha Plimpton. This has been episode 208 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Friday evening with me here in New York. If you caught this episode on the YouTube channel but haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you caught this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 209 real soon. Until then, peace.